The HOA president smiled coldly as she slammed the glass door on my 5-year-old daughter's tiny hand. Emma's screams echoed through the morning air as her fingers bent at impossible angles. Margaret Thornfield thought she'd broken us. She had no idea she'd just awakened a father's darkest revenge. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The morning started like any other Tuesday in Willowbrook Estates. I was walking my 5-year-old daughter Emma to the community playground when we saw the crowd gathered outside the HOA office. Emma's tiny hand squeezed mine as she pointed to the colorful balloons tied to the fence, her eyes lighting up with innocent joy. "Daddy, look. A party," she said with the pure excitement only children possess, bouncing on her toes in her favorite pink sneakers. But this wasn't a party. This was the beginning of a war I never saw coming. Margaret Thornfield, our HOA president, stood on the concrete steps like a general addressing her troops. She held her clipboard like a weapon, her perfectly styled gray hair unmoved by the morning breeze. Her cold blue eyes scanned the crowd with the precision of a hawk hunting prey. At 62, Margaret had the kind of sharp features that seemed designed for disapproval, and her expensive pantsuit screamed authority over our modest suburban community. "Attention residents," she announced, her voice cutting through the morning air like broken glass. "Effective immediately, all playground equipment will be removed from the community area. The insurance company has deemed it a significant liability risk." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Emma loved that playground more than anything in the world. Every day after my 12-hour shifts at Johnson's warehouse, loading trucks and moving inventory until my back ached, I'd bring her here. It was our sacred time together, especially precious since her mother Sarah had passed away from cancer 2 years ago. This playground wasn't just swings and slides to us. It was where Sarah had spent her final months, when the chemotherapy made her too weak for much else. She'd sit on the bench, wrapped in her favorite yellow blanket, watching Emma play while I pushed our daughter on the swings. Those moments were golden threads in the dark tapestry of Sarah's illness. "But the children need somewhere to play," called out Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street, her voice shaking with emotion. She had 3 grandchildren who visited every weekend. Margaret's smile was razor-sharp and colder than winter steel. "Children can play in their own yards. The HOA is not responsible for providing entertainment facilities. We're here to maintain property values, not run a daycare center." Emma tugged on my work shirt, her small face creased with confusion. "Daddy, what does that mean? Are they taking away my swings?" I knelt down to her level, trying to keep my voice steady while my heart hammered against my ribs. "It means they want to take away the playground, sweetheart. All of it." Her brown eyes, so much like her mother's that it sometimes took my breath away, filled with tears that threatened to spill over. "But I love the purple slide. Mommy used to push me on the swings there every day. She said she'd always be watching me play from heaven." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. That playground held our most precious memories. It was where Sarah had taught Emma to pump her legs on the swing, where we'd celebrated Emma's 4th birthday with a small party, where I'd secretly scattered some of Sarah's ashes beneath the old oak tree that provided shade over the sandbox. Sarah had organized 3 fundraisers to buy that equipment, spending her own money when donations fell short. She'd painted every piece herself, staying up late into the night during her good days. I stood up slowly, my hands clenching into fists that shook with barely contained rage. "Margaret, you can't do this. The children in this neighborhood need that playground. It's been here for 6 years without a single serious injury." She looked at me with the kind of disgust usually reserved for something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "Mr. Patterson, your emotional attachment doesn't override safety regulations and legal liability. The decision is final and non-negotiable." "My wife built half of that equipment with her own hands," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "She organized fundraisers, spent her own money, painted every piece herself. She did it for all the children in this community, not just Emma. You can't just destroy her legacy." The crowd murmured in agreement. Several neighbors nodded, remembering Sarah's dedication to making our community better. But Margaret's expression didn't soften even slightly. "Your deceased wife's hobby project is not my concern," Margaret replied with stunning coldness. "I'm responsible for protecting this HOA from lawsuits, not preserving sentimental memories. The equipment will be removed tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp." The crowd gasped audibly. Several people stepped back, shocked by her callousness. Mrs. Chin from down the street put her hand over her mouth. Even hardened Mr. Williams, who usually agreed with Margaret's strict policies, looked uncomfortable. But I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I could see my reflection in her cold eyes. "How dare you?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage I'd never felt before, not even during Sarah's darkest days. Margaret raised one perfectly plucked eyebrow. "Excuse me? How dare you dismiss my wife's memory like that? Sarah cared about this community. She cared about these children, all of them. She spent her final healthy months making sure they had a place to play and be happy. And look where all that caring got her," Margaret said with a smirk that made my blood run cold. The words hung in the air like poison gas. The entire crowd fell silent. Even the morning birds seemed to stop chirping. Emma started crying, not understanding why the mean lady was making Daddy so upset, but sensing the terrible tension in the air. I picked her up, holding her close as she buried her face in my shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs. "Daddy, why is she being so mean?" "I don't know, baby," I whispered, stroking her silky hair. "Some people just have cold hearts." "We're going inside the HOA office now," Margaret announced to the crowd, clearly enjoying the devastation she'd caused. "This discussion is over. Anyone who wishes to file a formal complaint can schedule an appointment." As the crowd began to disperse, people shaking their heads and muttering angrily, I noticed Emma had dropped her favorite stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hoppy, near the HOA office steps. The worn purple bunny had been Sarah's last gift to Emma, bought during a rare good day when the cancer seemed to be retreating. I set Emma down for just a moment to retrieve the precious toy. "Stay right here, sweetheart. Don't move." But Emma, still crying and confused, her little mind not processing my words through her distress, ran toward the HOA office door just as Margaret and her assistant were entering. Margaret saw Emma coming, I'm certain of it, but instead of stepping aside or waiting, she deliberately slammed the heavy glass door. The door caught Emma's tiny hand with a sickening crunch. Her scream pierced the morning air like a knife through my soul, a sound no parent should ever have to hear. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, but those 5 seconds felt like an eternity of torture. Emma was on her knees on the concrete, cradling her crushed hand against her chest, blood seeping between her fingers and dripping onto her favorite dress. "Emma? Emma, Daddy's here." I dropped to the ground beside her, my hands shaking violently as I tried to assess the damage without making it worse. 3 of her fingers were bent at unnatural angles that made my stomach lurch. Her palm was already swelling rapidly and turning deep purple. The bones in her tiny hand looked wrong, misaligned under her pale skin. Margaret stood in the doorway, not even a trace of concern on her perfectly made-up face. She didn't move to help, didn't call for assistance, didn't even look particularly bothered by a child's agony. "Perhaps you should teach your child not to run toward closing doors," she said with ice-cold indifference. Something inside me snapped completely. Not just broke, but shattered into fragments that could never be put back together the same way. I gently lifted Emma, whispering reassurances through my own tears while her blood stained my shirt. "It's okay, baby. Daddy's here. We're going to fix this. I promise we're going to fix this." But as I carried my broken daughter to the car, her small body racked with pain, I made a silent promise that would change everything. Margaret Thornfield had just declared war on the wrong father. She'd hurt my child, dismissed my wife's memory, and shown not 1 ounce of human decency. She was about to learn what happened when you crossed a man who had already lost everything that mattered once and refused to lose it again. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights, doctors and scrubs, and Emma's heartbreaking sobs that gradually weakened as they gave her pain medication. The X-rays showed the devastating truth: 2 complete fractures in her index finger, a dislocated middle finger that had torn ligaments, and severe bruising across her entire palm. The orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Martinez, was kind but honest. "She'll need immediate surgery to set the bones properly," he explained, his voice gentle. "Then months of physical therapy. Even with the best treatment, she may never regain full use of that hand. The damage is quite extensive for such a small child." I sat beside Emma's hospital bed that night, watching her sleep with her tiny hand wrapped in bandages and elevated on pillows. Tubes ran from her arm to an 4 bag, and her face was still puffy from crying. She looked so small, so fragile, so innocent. She didn't deserve this pain. In the darkness of that hospital room, listening to the steady beep of monitors, I planned Margaret Thornfield's complete destruction. I started my research the next morning while Emma slept. Margaret Thornfield had been HOA president for 8 years, ruling our community of 200 homes with an iron fist and zero tolerance for dissent. But everyone has secrets buried in their past, and I had nothing but time and motivation to find hers. The first crack in her armor appeared 3 days later when I accessed the HOA's financial records through a public information request. Margaret had been embezzling funds to cover her son Derek's gambling debts. $50,000 over 2 years, hidden in fake maintenance contracts with companies that didn't exist, and inflated vendor payments to her brother-in-law's landscaping business. But that wasn't nearly enough. Not for what she'd done to Emma. I dug deeper, hiring a private investigator with money from my savings account. Margaret's perfect marriage was a facade. Her husband Richard had left her 6 months ago after discovering her affair with Jake Morrison, the pool maintenance contractor. But she'd been telling everyone he was on an extended business trip to Europe. The truth was messier and more humiliating. Richard had divorced her quietly, taking half of everything, including her precious savings account. Still not enough. I wanted her to feel the same helplessness Emma had felt. Then I found the real treasure buried in county records and EPA filings. Margaret's perfect lawn, her pride and joy that had won the Neighborhood Beautification Award 3 consecutive years, was maintained using banned pesticides that violated federal environmental regulations. She'd been bribing Inspector Williams to falsify safety reports, putting every family in our community at risk of chemical exposure. But I wanted more than her resignation or even criminal charges. I wanted her to experience the same public humiliation and powerlessness that she'd inflicted on others. The plan took 2 weeks to execute perfectly. I documented everything with photographs, copied financial records, obtained sworn statements from witnesses, and compiled evidence that would destroy her from every angle. But the beauty was in the timing and presentation. Margaret had scheduled the annual HOA meeting for Thursday evening, October 15th. The entire neighborhood would be there, including City Council member Patricia Walsh, whom Margaret had been courting for months, trying to get appointed to the City Planning Commission. I hired my private investigator to serve her with a comprehensive lawsuit exactly 30 minutes before the meeting started. Not just for Emma's medical bills, which were already approaching $15,000, but for emotional distress, negligence, deliberate assault on a minor, and violation of her fiduciary duties as HOA president. The papers were delivered right in front of everyone entering the community center, with a photographer present to document her reaction. As Margaret stood at the podium that evening, trying to maintain her composure while explaining what she called a frivolous and vindictive lawsuit, I stood up in the back of the packed room. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the crowd of nearly 100 residents. "Before we begin tonight's meeting, I think you should know exactly who you've been trusting with your money and your community's welfare." I activated the projector I'd secretly set up earlier, connected to my laptop. The first image showed Margaret's falsified financial records in stark black and white. Gasps filled the room as people saw line items for thousands of dollars in tree maintenance for trees that had been cut down 3 years ago, roof repairs on buildings that didn't exist, and security services that were never provided. $50,000, I announced clearly. That's how much Margaret Thornfield has systematically stolen from this community over the past 2 years to pay for her son's gambling debts in Atlantic City. Margaret's face went completely white, then flushed deep red. "This is slander. You can't prove any of." The next slide showed detailed photographs of the banned pesticides in her garden shed, clearly labeled with EPA warning signs and violation notices that she'd been ignoring for months. "She's been poisoning our groundwater with illegal chemicals," I continued, my voice steady and factual. "The same groundwater that feeds into our community wells, the same water our children drink when they play outside." Parents in the audience began standing up, anger rippling through the crowd like wildfire spreading through dry grass. Someone shouted about their child's recent illness. Another parent demanded to know what other secrets Margaret had been hiding. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. The final slide was an enlarged photograph of Emma's X-rays, her tiny broken bones stark white against the black background, accompanied by photos of her bandaged hand and medical reports detailing her injuries. 5 days ago," I said, my voice now trembling with controlled emotion, "this woman deliberately and maliciously slammed a heavy glass door on my 5-year-old daughter's hand. Emma Patterson will require months of surgery and physical therapy. The doctors say she may never regain full use of her hand. She was trying to retrieve her stuffed rabbit when Margaret Thornfield chose cruelty over basic human decency." The room erupted into chaos. People were shouting, demanding immediate answers, calling for Margaret's arrest and removal. Parents who had children were standing and yelling. But I raised my hand for silence, and somehow, the room gradually quieted. "There's more," I said quietly, and the room fell completely silent. I played the audio recording I'd obtained of Margaret's phone conversation with Jake Morrison, discussing not just their affair but her secret plans to sell the community's common areas to Hartwell Development Corporation. She'd been negotiating to sell our playground, the community garden that fed 12 families, and the small lake where children learned to fish, all for personal profit that would have netted her over $200,000. Margaret tried to speak, opening and closing her mouth like a fish out of water, but no words came out. Her carefully constructed world of lies and manipulation was crumbling in real time, in front of everyone she tried to impress, control, and deceive. "You asked what Karen got my wife," I said, stepping closer to the front of the room, my voice carrying to every corner. "It got her a daughter who learned to love her community and fight for what's right. It got her a husband who learned that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, no matter how powerful they think they are. And it got you exactly what you deserve, exposure for the fraud, thief and child abuser that you really are." The police arrived 20 minutes later, called by multiple residents who'd witnessed Margaret's crimes firsthand. Detective Rivera and Officer Thompson had been waiting outside, alerted by my private investigator. As they led Margaret away in handcuffs, she finally found her voice one last time. "You'll regret this, Patterson. I'll destroy you and that brat of yours." I walked up to her, close enough that only she could hear my response. "You already tried to destroy what mattered most to me, Margaret. You failed. Emma is stronger than you'll ever be, and this community is better than you deserved." The criminal charges took 6 months to work through the system. Margaret was convicted on 12 counts of embezzlement, fraud, bribery, environmental violations, and assault on a minor. She received 4 years in federal prison and was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and all affected families. The civil lawsuit I filed resulted in a settlement of $200,000 that covered all of Emma's medical expenses and established a college fund that would secure her future education. But the sweetest revenge came from the community itself. The new HOA board, elected unanimously immediately after Margaret's arrest, voted to not only rebuild the playground but expand it into the most beautiful community space in the entire city. They allocated funds that Margaret had hoarded for years, bringing in professional designers and the finest equipment available. They named it Sarah's Garden, in honor of my wife's dedication to the neighborhood children and families. Emma's hand healed better than the doctors had initially predicted. She still can't make a perfect fist and cold weather makes her fingers ache, but she learned to adapt with remarkable resilience. More importantly, she learned that sometimes adults make terrible mistakes, but good people will always stand up to protect children and fight against bullies. On the sunny Saturday morning when we officially opened Sarah's Garden, Emma stood beside me as I cut the red ribbon. Her scarred hand held mine tightly, and she looked up at me with those beautiful brown eyes that reminded me so much of her mother. "Daddy, Mommy would be proud of the new playground, wouldn't she?" I squeezed her hand gently, feeling the slightly uneven bones beneath her soft skin. "She'd be proud of you, sweetheart. For being so brave, so strong, and for never letting mean people make you afraid to keep playing and laughing." Emma smiled her brilliant gap-toothed grin and ran toward the magnificent purple slide, bigger and better than the original one Margaret had tried to destroy forever. As I watched her play alongside dozens of other children, their laughter filling the air like music, I realized that revenge isn't always about destroying your enemies. Sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful and lasting where they tried to create destruction, teaching your children to be stronger and kinder than those who hurt them, and proving that love, community, and determination will always triumph over cruelty, greed, and hate. Margaret Thornfield had wanted to break our spirit, tear apart our family, and crush our community's heart. Instead, she'd given us the motivation to become stronger, more united, and more committed to protecting each other than we'd ever been before. The playground filled with children's laughter every day, parents gathered to share stories and support each other, and families came together in the space my wife had dreamed of and my daughter had suffered to preserve. That evening, as Emma and I walked home hand in hand, she looked back at the playground one more time, her eyes bright with contentment. "Daddy, do you think the mean lady learned her lesson in jail?" I considered the question carefully. Margaret was serving her sentence in federal prison, would likely never work in community management again, and had lost everything she had valued: her reputation, her freedom, her stolen money, and her power over others. "I think so, sweetheart. But more importantly, our community learned something even more valuable." "What's that?" "That when good people stand together and refuse to be bullied, nobody can take away what really matters. And that sometimes the best way to honor someone we love is to fight for what they believed in." Emma nodded seriously, processing this wisdom with the gravity that children bring to important truths. Then her face brightened with excitement. Can we come back tomorrow? I want to try the new monkey bars, and Mrs. Rodriguez said she'd teach me to use the climbing wall. Of course we can. We can come here every single day if you want to. And we did. Every single day, Emma and I spent time at Sarah's garden. Not because we had to, but because we chose to. Because that's what family does. They show up for each other, they protect what matters, they never let bullies win, and they build something beautiful from the ashes of what cruel people tried to destroy. Margaret Thornfield thought she could crush a 5-year-old's hand and break a widowed father's spirit. Instead, she discovered that some people fight back harder than she ever imagined possible, that communities can be stronger than individual cruelty, and that love really does conquer hate when good people refuse to give up. The playground still stands today, more beautiful than ever, filled with the laughter of children who will grow up knowing that their community will always protect them from those who would do them harm. And Emma? She's learning piano now, her scarred fingers moving gracefully across the keys, creating something beautiful and meaningful from the hands that someone once tried to break. That's the kind of revenge that lasts forever.